It's December 30th. So who already has every bit of Christmas decorations packed up and in the attic? Anyone? Okay, a few of us. What about on the 26th? Who did on the 26th? Yeah? 25th? Anyone? Ours are still up, and I'm holding on for dear life. I want them to stay. But did anyone get so sick of the Christmas tree that they just threw it out the door? I mean, because I remember one year growing up, we had just gotten a cat, and it was an outdoor cat, and so it would not stay out of the tree. And so it had knocked the thing over so many times that it was just, we were almost fed up. It had like broken the stand, it had broken some of the presents under the tree. And then on Christmas Eve, it knocked it over twice. And my whole family was just like, all right, this is enough. And so we just took the tree, we threw it out in the backyard and said, we'll deal with that on the 26th. And so we opened presents on Christmas morning with no tree. And then on the 26th, for the first time ever, my parents went out and bought a fake tree. So that's just a really big memory of my family and this cat, which I'm not a cat person, but to each their own. But now we are a week after Christmas. I mean, most of us have the trash can full of wrapping paper already hauled off. Kids' toys are already needing new batteries. I mean, am I right? And we're probably still eating leftovers. I mean, what was that? Turkey sandwiches, turkey hash, all the different ways you use turkey or ham. But I'm super sorry. And some of us feel really rested and relaxed from Christmas, and we're ready for a new year. But a lot of us are like, yeah, I'm more stressed out than before. I need a vacation from Christmas vacation and all the wrapping and cooking and cleaning up and annoying toys. But whether we're ready or not, tomorrow is the 31st. And that means Tuesday is January 2019. And tomorrow night, people are going to pack into Times Square and cities all across the country and around the world to celebrate. And there will be parties and food and games, all celebrating the end of 2018 and the start of 2019. And so right about now is when a lot of us look back over the year and we kind of evaluate it. I mean, I hear things from all over the place like, yeah, I'm ready for 2018 to be done. Or 2018 was a huge year for me. Or even just, it was another year. Maybe 2018 was a year of first for you. Or a year that you got a new job or got married or had a child or moved. But maybe it's also the year that you lost someone that you loved. Or you lost a job. And so everyone is looking towards 2019 and wondering, what is it going to be like? So what would your answer be if I asked you to complete this sentence? I wonder if 2019 will be the year that I think most of us can come up with something pretty quickly. And whether we realize it or not, we naturally look at January 1 as different than any other day of the year. I mean, it's a new year, and it's a great time for us to make changes in our lives because we're closing one chapter and we're opening another. And that's why so many people make New Year's resolutions because, yeah, we could make changes in our lives on like August 29th, but that doesn't really have the same power as saying like, I'm starting January 1. And so we all know the cliche resolutions about health and relationships and money and work, etc. And maybe you make one and maybe you don't. Maybe you don't do any kind of New Year's tradition. But I think one of the biggest reasons that so many people gather together and celebrate on December 31st is because it represents a kind of fresh start. If 2018 was a year to forget, then 2019 could be better. If 2018 was a great year, we can hope that the next year continues the trend. And whether it's big or small, a fresh start sounds nice, right? Well, if there's anyone who has ever needed a fresh start, it was definitely Ruth from a person in the Bible named Ruth and her family. So, see, Ruth was a princess from a country called Moab, which is in modern-day Jordan. And she was not Jewish, but her story was so important that there was an entire book of the Bible named after her. See, her story begins with a severe shortage of food in Israel, a famine. And whenever there were famines in ancient times, anyone with enough money would take their whole family, they'd pack up, and they would move until they could survive at their home again. So they'd be gone for months, maybe even years. And so a man from Bethlehem packed up his family, his wife Naomi and his 2 sons, and they moved to Moab. And so shortly after they moved, the man died, leaving Naomi and their 2 sons. And while their 2 sons married 2 princesses from Moab, one named Orpah, not to be confused with Oprah, and the other was her sister Ruth. And now this was not a common thing because there were a lot of laws in place that told Jewish people that they were supposed to marry other Jewish people. Ideally, they would marry people who were born Jewish, but they could technically marry someone who had converted to Judaism, which was this circumstance. So, a few years after that, both of these sons die too. And so this leaves Naomi alone with her 2 daughters-in-law. Both her husband and both of her sons died in a span of 10 years. So Naomi decides she's going to move back to her hometown of Bethlehem. Now, this is because she has no husband or sons, and she has nobody to provide for her. Because at this time in history, a woman could not usually make enough money to support herself. And now she was too old to have children, and so she was moving home to find an extended family member to take care of her. And then when she's ready to leave, listen to what she tells her daughters-in-law to do. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye. Now, I need to explain a few things about these verses because there's some inside information. When the original readers read this, they would have recognized that this was the cultural norm. Naomi was basically saying, okay, you know what we have to do now. Since we're all widows, we have to go back to live with our closest relatives so they can take care of us. Because this was long before life insurance or Social Security. And we talked a few months ago about how it was really rare in this culture for a woman to inherit anything when her family died. Everything would go to the closest male family member. And so, like I said, it was difficult for a woman to find a job to support herself. And so it became the responsibility of her family to take care of her. And so these women had nothing left. And this was an insanely difficult time in their life. And now they were supposed to leave the only family that they had known for the past 10 years and go home empty-handed. Look what happens next. And they, the daughters-in-law, wept aloud and said to her, meaning Naomi, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It's more bitter for me than for you because the Lord's hand has turned against me." So these women offer to go with Naomi, to break protocol and help her out. But Naomi insists because in her eyes, she has failed these women. She has nothing left to offer them, so it would be pointless for them to stay with her. I mean, especially because Jewish rabbis believe that Orpah and Ruth were sisters and they were princesses. And so they had options. They could move back home to the palace and be taken care of, or if they wanted to, they could easily find another husband. And Naomi believed that she was useless to Ruth and Orpah. But not just to them, she believed she was useless in general. Because she believed what a lot of us believe, that the situations that we go through define us. That when horrible things happen, it's because we aren't good enough, or we're hopeless, or maybe God even forgot that we existed. And it's really hard not to feel that way, especially when we look around us and it feels like our entire world got napalmed and we're just left to pick up the pieces. But see, the story doesn't end there. Look what happens in verse 14. At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. And now this is a really important part of the story. Because at this point, Orpah decides to go back to her people. She did that thing that we all do when we offer to do something, but we really hope we don't have to. It's like when I offer my wife, hey, can I help you clean up with dinner? And she's like, oh, no, I got it. You go ahead and you go sit down. Okay. And I have like my feet up before she finishes the sentence. I mean, we do the polite thing and we offer, but we're honestly kind of glad they didn't take us up on it. But see, Ruth didn't do that. And Naomi continues to try to convince her because she thinks Ruth is making a big mistake. But see, it doesn't work. Look what she says in verse 16. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Ruth knows this is a big decision. Because that would be a really weird response to something small like, hey, I'm going to the store, do you want to go? No, see, Ruth is making a promise to Naomi that she's all in. She's saying, listen, you don't get it. I'm staying with you. It's not optional. I'm not abandoning you. And she says it in this really dramatic way on purpose because she's leaving everything behind for this woman who technically isn't even related to her anymore. She's turning down living in a palace to probably beg for money in a foreign country. And so she promises she's going to give up her heritage, her old religion, her country, and she even promises that she's going to stay in Israel even after Naomi dies, no matter what happens. And she wants Naomi to understand how committed she is. But Ruth had no idea how this was going to work out. I mean, she could be making the biggest mistake of her life. What if they get there and Ruth can't find work, let alone a new husband? What if she dies an old homeless widow in a foreign country just 100 miles from the palace she was born in? What if the people reject her? Because in this part of the world, your nationality came before anything else. This was tribal culture, and outsiders did not have to be welcomed. And she wasn't just moving to any country. See, Israel and Moab hated each other because of the things that Ruth's father and grandfather did to Israel. So she could be the most hated person in town. And I mean so much worse than your neighbor who flies a Steelers flag on their porch. So much worse than that. And there are so many variables in Ruth's future. But she chose to do it anyway because she loved Naomi that much. So Ruth and Naomi pack up and they head to Bethlehem for their fresh start. But see, it wasn't quite the fresh start that we hope for, where we're like set up for a little while and we have opportunities in front of us and none of our baggage follows us. It's actually the opposite. Because when they get to Bethlehem, everybody recognizes Naomi. And they notice that her family's not with her. And so the Bible says that they're actually excited to see her. They're like, is it really Naomi? Like they'd missed her. But see, Naomi was not excited to be home because she wasn't coming back the way she left. In her eyes, her life had fallen apart. So Ruth and Naomi find a place to stay, but they have to provide for themselves. And so Ruth decides she has to do something. So she goes out and she follows workers who are harvesting in the fields, and she picks up what they leave behind. And in this culture, that's kind of like dumpster diving. I mean, Jewish people allowed the poor to pick up the leftovers out of the field so they could survive, but it was an extremely demeaning thing to do. And now, I know what some of you are thinking. So you're telling me that a princess is dumpster diving to feed her dead husband's mom. That's her fresh start. I know. But the story doesn't end here. Because without knowing it, Ruth happens to choose a field that belonged to one of Naomi's relatives named Boaz. And when he meets her, he doesn't run her off or talk down to her or anything like that. He asks her to stay. He offers her a job with the rest of the people on his estate. And he promises to keep her safe and that she can have some of the water that her workers have brought in. And now I know that sounds kind of weird, like, oh man, you get the Brita pitcher instead of the tap. But see, it's so different in this time because Israel was surrounded by deserts. And so water was hard to find. And if you wanted clean water, you had to go even farther to get it. And so for Boaz to offer some broke widow the good, clean water and to allow her to continue to pick up the extras is insanely generous. He did not have to do this. So look how Ruth responds in verse 10. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you didn't know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So Boaz recognizes the sacrifice that Ruth made. That she left everything to move to another country where she knew nobody just to help her mother-in-law. And this is why Boaz lets her stay. But he does more than that. Then he invites her in for lunch. And he says, "Eat as much as you want. In fact, you can take all the leftovers from the kitchen home to Naomi." And then he tells his workers not to bother her, not to mess with her when she picks up the grain, and actually orders them to purposely drop some of the good grain for her to pick up. And so, this is the most important part of the story. Because that night, when Ruth got home to Naomi, she told her all about her day and about the man who gave her work and a warm meal. And Naomi realized that Ruth is talking about one of her husband's relatives, Boaz. And so she starts to get an idea. In the next chapter, she arranges for Ruth to show her interest in marrying Boaz, and he accepts. And shortly after, they have a son. And this is so important because in Jewish culture, one of the worst things that could happen to you is for you to die without any children or grandchildren. Because their heritage and your legacy was the most important thing. This culture really valued ancestry. So much so that they put things into place to honor people who died without any children. See, if a man dies without any children, there's a tradition that legally gives him a family after he passes away. Because if his wife remarries, the first child she has with her new husband is legally considered a child of her first husband. It's a kind of tribute to him so that he's not forgotten. And then the new husband, the biological father, is considered a redeemer because he saved another man from being forgotten. So when Ruth had a son with Boaz, according to Jewish tradition, this boy was actually Naomi's grandson, even though he wasn't biologically. So Ruth and Boaz did the greatest thing that someone could do for Naomi. They gave her a family again. And the story still doesn't end there. Because not only was this baby special because it redeemed Naomi's family. See, this baby, whose name was Obed, was born and raised in Bethlehem. And he would raise his family there when he got older. And history tells us that Obed was the grandfather of King David. And so if you remember what we talked about a few weeks ago, this means that Ruth and Boaz and Naomi are in the family of Jesus. And this is such an important story because without Boaz, Ruth and Naomi are hopeless. There was no public assistance or charitable organizations. The only way to live a comfortable life as a woman in this time period was to be married. And Boaz knew this. And so he steps in and saves them. He welcomes them into his home and gives Naomi a family. And we're still talking about this story 3,000 years later because Boaz is symbolic of Jesus. Because he sees that there is no way out for Ruth and Naomi. But he knows there's a way for him to save them. He doesn't have to. There's actually another person in this story that should have stepped in and didn't. So Boaz does. And see, that's exactly what Jesus did. Because he looked down from heaven and he saw us. He saw all the mistakes we'd made, all the things we've been through, all the people who had hurt us, and he knew that there was a way to save us. He didn't have to do it. I mean, he was good. He was in heaven. Everything was great. But he loved us enough that he stepped in anyway. At the same time, none of this could have happened if Ruth did what her sister Orpah did. If she had gone back to her people and given up, there was legitimately nothing left for her mother-in-law. So because she committed herself to Naomi and stuck to her word, everything changed. I'm not saying that if you put other people before yourself that your life will be perfect, but here's what I am saying. I guarantee you there were years where Ruth said, next year has to be better. It couldn't possibly get worse than this. And she could have given up. But behind the scenes, God was piecing things together that Ruth couldn't see. Even through the worst time in her life, through losing her husband, through moving to a different country that she'd never been to, through dumpster diving to survive, God was still working. So if this past year has been one of the hardest years you've ever been through, I want to tell you that God is still working. Even when you feel like Naomi and you feel like God has forgotten about you, when you're completely convinced that if there is a God, he doesn't know you exist, let alone care about you. And well, I can't explain why we go through the things that we do. I can tell you that God has not forgotten about you. He does care about you, and he's working behind the scenes in ways that none of us can see. And if this has been a year to remember for you, then this is time to thank God for that. Because I'm sure there have been years where you were ready for the year to be done, the hard times. But right now, life is good. And so take a second this week and think back through those hard times that you've been through. And look for the ways that God was working behind the scenes and how you couldn't see it, but now you can see it all over the place. Maybe it's time when you lost someone that you loved and you didn't know what was next. Or you had given up hope on finding a career that you actually loved or finding someone to marry. Now looking back, you can see the difference that God made in your life. And looking forward to 2019, there's still going to be good times and bad times. You're still going to go through times where you feel like God has forgotten about us. And we're allowed to feel that way. And we can even talk to God about that because he can handle it. But we also know that if we have accepted what Jesus did for us on the cross, that he says that we are his family and he will never forget about us. And after the dust settles on whatever we're going through, we'll be able to look back and say, man, God was with me even when I couldn't tell. So it's clear how God used Boaz to help redeem the lives of Ruth and Naomi. But there's another kind of redeemer in this story. One that God designed every single one of us to be able to be. A friend who sticks with people even through the worst. Because no matter how bad it got, Ruth knew that she had Naomi, and Naomi knew that she had Ruth. And a lot of us know that if we have someone that we love to go through life with us, that it can give us that tiny bit that we need to keep going. And some of us also know that if we don't have that person when we're going through something hard, it just adds even more pain to whatever we're going through. And see, that's a big reason why Velocity Church exists. We know how important it is to have community around us. If you've been around Velocity for a while, you know that we only do 3 things. We exist to ignite the faith that fuels your life to impact the world. And we know that one of the best ways to fuel your life is to have people in your lives to come around you in the hard times and in the amazing times. And that's why we work so hard to make Velocity Church feel like a family. I love watching videos of people like we saw earlier who decided to accept Jesus and be baptized, because so many people say their favorite thing about Velocity is that they feel like a family. They walk in and someone gives them a hug and makes them feel welcome. It's one of the first things they notice. And we can also take that feeling of family and community one step farther. We can get out of these rows on Sunday mornings and we can spend time with each other in each other's homes during the week. And that's why we created fuel groups, to find other people who really want to take a step towards God and need other people around them to help them do that, to go through the everyday things that we deal with. And so if you're one of the people who have found a fuel group that you love, tell other people about it. The next semester starts in a few weeks, and wouldn't it be amazing if every person in this room felt like they had a family of people that they could go with them through the hard times and the good times? And if you've never been in a fuel group, it would make a really good New Year's resolution. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about when each group is going to meet where, but I challenge you to try it this year. You don't have to make a 3-year commitment or sign a contract or anything. It's just 9 weeks. Give it a try. I think you'll be amazed at the difference that it can make. And I know there are so many people in this room that agree with me. Will you pray with me? God, I'm thankful that we can sit here and talk about the story of Ruth and Boaz 3,000 years after it happened. And the amazing ways that you were working behind the scenes even when Ruth felt like there was no way out. And as we're starting to look toward 2019 and we have to remember what number to write in the date line, allow us to just remember that this year can be different because you're continuing to work in our lives. But let us also remember that we can make the difference that Ruth did. That we can be around people who are going through things, and we can be the one that commits ourselves to staying with them. And what a crazy difference that can make in someone's life. I am so excited about what this church is like, and I cannot wait for what you're going to do in the future. Because all of us are hoping that we become a church that everyone feels like they have family that they can go to with anything. Because that's what you wanted. We love you so much, and thank you for what Jesus did on the cross. It's in your son's name that I pray. Amen.